Hey everyone, it's Kelvin, and welcome back to another watercolor tutorial for Procreate. So in today's video, we're going to explore transparency, glass, and liquids, and we're going to paint this Mojito illustration. I would say difficulty-wise, this is suitable for intermediate painters to advanced painters. It might be too complicated for a beginner, but it's worth a try. So I've got a watercolor paper texture already loaded into Procreate. And in this case, I'm using the St. Petersburg texture as usual. Now for the brushes, I think I can do all of this with the regular watercolor brush kit. And I'll put links to all the brushes and textures I use for this in the description below. So to start painting, I'm just going to select a layer underneath the paper texture, just like you normally would. And I'll start with a medium gray color, maybe a blue-gray like that. And I'm going to grab the fine liner pen brush. And at a really small size, maybe 20%, I think something like that. Maybe even a little bit smaller, I'm going to sketch out a glass. Next, we're going to use a feature called Alpha Lock. This is a Procreate feature that you've probably used before, but I'll cover the basics right here. So if I change my color, and I use that same fine liner pen, watch what happens here when I draw on this. See, when I draw, obviously it draws on the glass and also on the white background, but let me undo that and then I'm going to turn on Alpha Lock and you'll see what happens. So in the Layers panel, select the layer that you want to modify here, just tap it to bring up the menu and then tap on Alpha Lock. Now watch what happens. If I grab the same brush, same color, now when I color it seems normal, but when I go over the edges, it stops. So obviously with the watercolor set, we're dealing with a lot of transparency, so Alpha Lock isn't suitable for everything, but if you're using the fine liner pen, it's going to create basically solid lines, so it's ideal for this. So just turn on Alpha Lock for that layer, and what I'm going to do now is basically just chase around this glass with a couple of white lines, I guess, kind of randomly placing them like this. There we go, and the point of this is I'm just trying to get a couple other shades of this gray in there. So after I've got that light gray, I'm going to go and select pretty much pure white and basically do it again. Next, I'm going to use the water blender. So I'm going to grab the water blender brush here. So normally with the water blender, if you blended the edge of something, it would bleed off into the white. But because we have Alpha Lock, watch what happens. You can see my blending totally stays within the outline of the glass. So I'm just going to go around and blend it up like this. There we go. That looks really good. The reason I did this is because I want to create a lot of variation in the grays, but I need to use the water blender to soften it up. Next, I want to add the reflections in the base of the glass. And just to make it easier, I think I'll just turn it sideways and kind of fill the screen. I think just like that. And I'm going to do this with the eraser brush set to the fine liner pen. And at kind of a small size, maybe around 10%, I'm just going to erase these two simple arc shapes like this. And there we go, I just leave it at that. It doesn't look right now, but later on when you see the rest of the drawing progress, you'll see how unimportant the reflection in the base of the glass actually is. Next, I'm going to move on and do the liquid in the glass, but first I think I'll lower the transparency of this. I want this to be very, very, very subtle, so I think 50% is good. And then while I'm at it, I'm going to change the transparency mode to multiply. Now to paint the liquid, I'll make a new layer for that. And I'm going to place it underneath the outline. And that's because I want this outline, set to multiply to sort of interact with that and give us a slightly darker edge. So I'm going to choose a kind of greenish color for this Mojito. I think something like that'll work. I'm going to grab the abstract round brush and at a really large size, I'll just kind of dab it around and make some interesting textures there. And once you've got a couple colors kind of blotchily kind of laid in there, just grab the water blender and then very, very sparingly just kind of mix this around a little bit. There we go, I think that's good enough. Now I'm going to grab the eraser brush here and basically cut it out to fit the glass. So along the sides, I'll cut it like this. Along the bottom, I'll kind of curve in just so we get a little bit of a white line there. Then when I reach the other side, I'll just kind of curve it back up and follow the edge of the glass. And then for the top, I'm basically going to cut it into an arc shape, sort of mirroring the top of the glass here. So it doesn't have to be perfect. I'll just kind of do my best to approximate that. So that didn't work. I'll try again. There we go. That one is much better. Now I've basically got the liquid inside cut out, but I do have this remaining extra watercolor around the edges, so I'm going to remove that with the selection tool. So I'll grab the selection tool and set it to automatic. Then I'll click and drag on the inside bit here that we want to keep, and I'll just set the threshold so it totally fills it out. There we go. That looks pretty good. And usually, like if you've seen my other videos, I'll duplicate this, but there is another way, another trick. So once that selection is complete, you can actually invert the selection. So I'm going to tap invert. So now it's selecting everything but what we selected. Then when I go to the layers panel, I can just tap on it and click clear. And it basically clears everything that we hadn't selected. And that's just a time-saving kind of trick. Now next, I need to define the top surface of the liquid. So the way I'm going to do that is basically by creating a shadow just underneath it. So I'm going to grab the selection tool, set it to freehand, and this time I'm going to make a selection that sort of mirrors that other side of the top of the glass. So I'll just go like this, circle down, and then just any kind of random distance down, you can just sort of cut back and then reconnect it. Then I'm going to go to the hue, saturation, and brightness and just darken that part of the liquid. Then I'll saturate it a little bit, deselect it, and now I've defined the top surface, but I have this kind of weird line down here. So I'm going to use the water blender brush, medium size, and just kind of break up that edge just to kind of hide it. I think at this point it looks sort of like a green smoothie. Now to give it that kind of magical kind of clarity, if you want to give it that clarity, just grab the selection tool, set it to freehand, and this time I'm going to select kind of an oval shape at the bottom of the glass. Then I'll go to hue, saturation, and brightness, and I'll brighten it a little bit. So there's a little bit of reflection happening down there. Next, I'm going to make another freehand selection, and this is going to give it some kind of trapped light, I guess. Something happens when you have a glass where it sort of focuses the light somehow, and this also says a lot kind of subconsciously about the clarity. So to do that, I'll just make a kind of triangle-shaped selection like this. I'll feather it out, hue, saturation, and brightness. I'll brighten it out quite a bit. I'm also going to saturate it a little bit, and then shift the color basically to any other color. And I'm not sure why this sort of tricks your brain, but it does something and makes it look like it's kind of glowing, like it's kind of clear. Now just for kind of stylistic reasons, I guess, I like to go in there again with the water blender and just kind of break up these hard edges just in a few places, because it does end up looking a little bit too perfect when you use the selection tool this way. So now that the glass and the liquid are done, I can move on and do some of the other details here, but everything else from now on is going to be above this. So, you know, here's the outline of the glass, here's the liquid. All the other details need to be above. So I think this needs a little slice of lime. So I'm going to choose kind of a desaturated lime green color, I guess. And then I'm going to use the fine liner pen and just rough this out really quickly. Now if you want to, you can add some details in here. So I'll do a long press to grab that color, maybe lighten it a little bit, and just do some lines in there like this. So there we go, that's it for the lime. It's really simple, you could definitely spend more time on it, but I think I'm happy with the way this one looks. Now to place it in the glass, I'm going to use the arrow tool here. And remember, the lime is on its own layer, so we can move it pretty much independently. And I'll just kind of tilt it and scale it to make it fit a little bit better in the glass, just like this. So once you're happy with the placement of the lime, we need to cut it to sort of allow the glass to show through. So I'm going to use the eraser brush for that, set to fine liner pen, kind of a small size, I guess. And I'll zoom in there and do my best to kind of follow the edge of the glass. There we go, that looks pretty good. I do see a weird transparency issue where kind of the liquid here is showing where the lime is cut. So what I'm going to do is go over to the layer with the liquid and then just fix that with the eraser brush. There we go, that looks better. Next, I want to kind of set the point where the lime slice disappears into the liquid. So I'm going to do that with the selection tool, the freehand selection tool, and I'll make a selection that basically covers the point where it enters the liquid like that. Then I'm going to grab the eraser brush. Now if I just use the eraser brush kind of at a large size there, just as it is, it's going to totally erase that. And that's not exactly what I want, so I'll undo it. Now if I lower the opacity of that brush, maybe I can lower it to like 50% and try again. Now you can see it erases, it erases it like 50%, which is much closer to what we want here. So I think that looks pretty good. Just gives the impression that it's entering the liquid and the refraction is changing. If you kind of do some studies with liquid, you'll notice oftentimes when you just put something in a liquid, it'll kind of lighten. Not in every case, but often it will kind of lighten the color a little bit. Next, I'm going to do some really simple mint leaves, and I'll do those on another layer. I'm just going to paint those mint leaves using the fine liner pen brush. Now with those completely done, I can use the move tool, the arrow tool, and just sort of once again kind of position them wherever I think they fit in. There we go, I think that looks nice. And just as I did with the lime slice, I'll use the eraser tool and kind of erase a path for the rim of the glass. And once again, we have the same transparency issue that we had with the lime. You can see this green background there. That's the liquid showing through. So I'm going to go to the liquid layer, select it, and then also erase that one along this kind of path here. There we go. That looks a lot better. Now the mint leaves are entering the liquid the same way that the lime slice is. So I'm going to use the same eraser trick that I used on the lime slice. First, I'll just make sure that the mint leaves are selected. Then I'm going to grab the selection tool, set it to freehand, select just the point where they enter the liquid. Then I'll grab the eraser brush, set it pretty large, but I'll lower the transparency to around 50% and just erase it like that. There we go, that looks pretty good. And now I can move on and do the straw. So I'm going to make another layer for that, kind of above everything. And that's going to be a pretty dark color, maybe a dark bluish color like that. And I'm going to do it with the abstract round brush. And I'll just rough it out, something like this. And I think that looks too thick, so I'll lower the size here a little bit. Try again. Now just like before, I need to erase a path to allow the kind of rim of the glass to show through. And just because this is watercolor, I'll round the edges a little bit. There we go. Now there's a point where the straw enters the liquid, so I'll actually just cut it off at that point and then round those edges. And now to kind of simulate, I guess it's like a diffraction effect, I guess, I'll just erase this all the way down to the surface of the water there. And I'll round that one off too. Then I'm going to move it kind of off center. So I'll grab the selection tool, set to freehand, and I'm just going to select the bottom half here. And I'm sure you've noticed this with glasses. Basically, when something enters the liquid, it's going to change how the light is traveling, the direction of the light. So I'll rotate it a little bit and then shift it off to the side. And this is not like a scientific thing, the painting here. I'm just trying to trick your mind into seeing this as a liquid, a fluid. Now, because the straw is kind of coming in at an angle, like you can imagine it leaning on the opposite rim, coming through towards us, and ending somewhere on this side of the glass. And liquids like this, like it's not totally clear, it is a little bit cloudy, so it's going to kind of get more visible as it comes towards us. And there's kind of a trick here we can do to help us give that illusion. So I'll grab the selection tool, set to freehand, and I'll make a selection that covers the bottom part of this straw. And then notice how I'm tapering away, then I'll connect it back. So I'm just selecting this sort of slice of the straw. Now when I feather this out quite a bit, I think like that, maybe 20%, then I'm going to grab the eraser brush, and at a really large size, I'll just do one pass with the eraser brush. So basically I've kind of faded it at the top point with the eraser and the selection, and now as it's traveling closer to us, it's getting more visible because there's less cloudy liquid kind of blocking the visibility of the straw. So hopefully that makes sense. As you saw, it looked okay before. This is just a subtle trick, maybe an optional trick. Now the straw looks a little bit flat, so I will add a highlight, and I'll do that with the selection tool set to freehand, and I'll just make a selection kind of like a band like that. Do add to do the other part here. I'll feather it out just a little bit. Then I'll go to hue, saturation, and brightness, and basically just brightening that portion. It just makes it look a little bit more like a cylinder. There we go. Next, I want to kind of modify basically where the surface of the liquid meets the end of the glass or the edge of the glass there. And usually what happens is there's kind of a bright line. So let me turn this sideways to make it a little bit easier to paint here. And I'll make a new layer above everything. I'll select pure white. I'm going to grab the fine liner pen, then at a really small size, I'm just going to make a line that's getting kind of thicker and thinner, just following the edge, just where the surface meets the glass there. Then after that, I'll do a couple of kind of like bubbles, I guess. Then after that, I'll just lower the transparency of that. I think maybe around 40 or 50% is good enough. Next, I'm going to show you my trick to painting watercolor ice. It's not perfect, but I think it's good enough for a small project like this. So I'll open the layers panel and just merge everything together onto one layer, everything we've painted at this point. This will just keep it pretty simple. And then I'm going to make a copy of it, and I'll turn off the original. And the reason I did that is making the ice is kind of destructive, so if we mess it up, it might be easier just to delete it and then grab the original. So I've got the copy selected. I'll grab the selection tool set to freehand, and I'll just rough out a bunch of kind of random ice shapes. There we go, I think that's good. Then I'll go to the adjustments here, and instead of hue, saturation, and brightness, I'm going to go to curves, layer, and I just want to grab the bottom edge here, just the bottom node, and just raise it up, and maybe set it to, I guess, something like that. I don't want it to stand off too much. There we go, that looks pretty good. Then I'm going to grab the water blender brush. Kind of 20-30% I think is a good size, just something to fit in there. And just in a couple areas, I'll just sort of blend the hard edges away, but I'm leaving a lot of hard edges behind, so there's still some kind of shape there. There we go, that looks pretty good. And I think while I have the water blender selected, I will kind of bleed out the straw a little bit. And this is just kind of a personal kind of style adjustment that I like. It just kind of happens when you do wet on wet watercolor. So just imagining the colors here, we're blending a little bit. There we go. And the ice, basically, you could leave it at this, but if you want it to be even more defined, even more shiny, you can go over it again. So I'll do that here. I'll grab the selection tool, set to freehand, and this time I'll trace out a couple of weird kind of random highlight shapes. There's no tricks, these are just random shapes, and I'll just do one on each one of these. There we go, and I'll feather all these out just a little bit. Same thing, I'll go to the curves, layer, and just raise the bottom node there. There we go, that looks pretty good. Now we're almost done here. I just want to add some highlights to this glass, and I'm going to do the highlights on a different layer, so I'll make a new layer above everything. I'll select pure white, fine liner pen, kind of a medium size, and I'll just do some random lines for the highlight. And I'm keeping them close to the edges, but it's not critical because we can move these around later on because it's on its own layer, I guess. And after that, I want these highlights to kind of fade off. So I'm going to grab the water blender, kind of a large size, and I'll just kind of blur out one side of each of these highlights. I think something like that's good. There we go. I think I'll move these, sort of center them a little bit more. Then I'll go to the layers panel and just lower the opacity a little bit. Maybe set it to around 85%. I don't want them to be kind of too intense. And there we go. This one is all done. And here's what it looks like when I print it out. So I think illustrations like this with a lot of transparency can be kind of daunting or intimidating if you haven't tried it before. And I think one of the problems is when you watch other people paint, it just looks like they know what they're doing. So you're like, maybe I'm just missing the chip in my brain to paint transparent or reflective stuff. But actually, a lot of transparency is just faking it. It looks amazing, but even the artist who's painting it, while they're painting it, they're like, I don't know what's going on. I don't know where these reflections should be. I think because you see how it's made and you know this is just, ink on paper, or in our case, just Procreate brushes on a screen, it's not really transparent, so you can't exactly fool yourself. But I think if you just give it a try, be bold, make bold highlights, bold transparency, draw something, put it aside for a day and come back the next day and look at it, and I think you'll be amazed. And I think once your brain realizes like, wow, it's okay to kind of doubt yourself when you're dealing with highlights because it's gonna look okay in the end. I think once you realize that, painting this sort of stuff becomes a lot easier. And that pretty much wraps it up. But as always, thank you so much for your support. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.